This is a real kind of full circle moment for me. I think the first time I saw Jonathan Rauch speak, it would have been in either 2008 or 2009. Back in my very early days on the staff of FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression down in Philadelphia, when he delivered the keynote at one of our very first Campus Freedom Network conferences. I definitely didn't think then that 16 or 17 years later I would be introducing a similar keynote from Jonathan at a conference I was running, but how lucky I am that I have worked so long in a professional world that is bound to bring me from time to time into contact with Jonathan Rauch. What can I say? He has written so brilliantly and eloquently about such a range of topics, everything from introversion to elder care to late middle age happiness to national politics to same-sex marriage. It's an imposing list for those who fancy themselves as writers of the range of topics that he can spin such eloquent words with. But it's his writings on free speech that have really done so much to capture the part of the world that I work in, and we're so lucky to have him here today. You may have read his books, Kindly Inquisitors, The New Attacks on Free Thought, or more recently, his book, The Constitution of Knowledge, A Defense of Truth. You may have read him in any number of publications from The Atlantic to National Journal to The New Republic to The New York Times to The Wall Street Journal to The Economist and on and on and on. I'm so grateful to have Jonathan with us at our conference today. It's a great honor and a great way to tie these proceedings together. When I had a co-op student working with me earlier this year, and it was one of her first days was when Jonathan was giving a talk at a conference on free speech and STEM out in Los Angeles, and I remember telling her, watch this keynote, because this is the movement at its best right here. This is what we aspire to. So I'm very glad to bring the movement at its best here to Cambridge to be with us all today. So everyone, please welcome Jonathan Rauch.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Wayne. Thank you, Giro and staff. I am honored, flattered, and thrilled to be with you, and I'm about to tell you three things. The first is the world's shortest guide to the Constitution of Knowledge. The second is what's gone wrong on university campuses, and the third is what we in this room can do about it. I should mention that I am mostly recovered from the cough from hell. It's a 4-week-long cough, and I'm mainlining cough drops and hot tea. So you may hear a little bit of that. Here is our operative question today. Can universities be saved from themselves? But we'll begin with a more fundamental and existential question, a question that's been asked by philosophers down through the ages. But my favorite formulation...
Admiral Stockdale, your opening statement, please, sir.
Who am I? Why am I here?
Does anyone recognize that? Raise your hand. Yeah, the older folks around here will recall this is the great moment from the 1992 vice presidential debate. It's a key question, who am I and why am I here? Or really, who are we? And why are we here? Well, I can think of some reasons. Here are a few. Free speech. Raise your hand if you think we're here for that. That's the whole room, as it should be. If anyone did not raise your hand, I will come speak to you after the meeting. You're in the wrong conference. Academic freedom. Raise your hand. Institutional neutrality. About half the room. Scientific integrity, this being MIT. So we have a pretty firm consensus on all four of those things. I'm going to suggest that what we're really defending, because it includes and harmonizes all four of those elements, is this: the Constitution of Knowledge, the subject of my book from 2021, available at fine book retailers everywhere. There's a lot in that book. But the point that I want to emphasize today is that if you ask most Americans where knowledge comes from, where truth comes from in a free society, they will probably say the marketplace of ideas. This is an idea that originates in the thought of John Stuart Mill and is first formulated in those words by Oliver Wendell Holmes in a U.S. Supreme Court decision in 1919. The best test of truth is the power of the thought to get itself accepted in the competition of the market. I love the marketplace of ideas metaphor. I use it all the time. It's a good thing, but it turns out that it's also a very incomplete thing. Because it turns out that because of cognitive and human social characteristics that are hardwired in, if you just throw people in an unstructured setting and hope that truth will rise to the surface, the results will be terrible. That's what the marketplace of ideas will look like. Hate speech, lies, propaganda, hogwash. People will troll each other for attention. They will go down rabbit holes and they will get in epistemic bubbles. This is a system by itself that does not work. The marketplace of ideas by itself is a wonderful thing, the idea of freedom and the idea of freedom as a necessary element to surface truth, but it's not sufficient. It's like the Declaration of Independence, a statement of principles of freedom, but you also need one of these. You need a constitution. You need, in a political realm, a political constitution. In the epistemic realm, you need an epistemic constitution. You need the constitution of knowledge, which is the rules, norms, and institutions that structure our public conversations so they lead us toward truth and away from ignorance, conflict, and oppression. Now, if you want to know in detail what the constitution of knowledge is, how it works, that's all in the book. We don't have time for it now. I will only say the constitution of knowledge, unlike the marketplace of ideas, is not a metaphor, a simile, figure of speech, or literary figure. It's a real thing. The rules are not written down in just one place, but they are rules and they are institutions. And you will find them on paper in places like the AAUP Red Book, the American Society of Newspapers Editors Ethics Guidelines, and the codes of conduct that govern what the faculty and students of MIT do every day, and the sense of right and wrong around knowledge that this university seeks or should seek to inculcate. For purposes of this discussion, we'll just say that the constitution of knowledge relies upon three essential ingredients. Free inquiry is the one we talk about the most. It's the easiest one to conceptualize, and of course, it's the main reason that, excuse me, that many of us are here today. It is necessary, free speech and free inquiry. It is not sufficient. You also need the discipline of fact. You need to have people who, at least in their professional lives, are committed to follow experiment, evidence, reason, and argument wherever it leads, even if it leads somewhere which is not the place they'd rather it leave. You cannot make stuff up. You cannot fudge the evidence. There's a lot of rules around this. And third, viewpoint diversity. We all have innate biases. I cannot spot mine, you cannot spot yours, but I can spot some of yours, you can spot some of mine. The Constitution of Knowledge harnesses viewpoint diversity to ensure that assumptions are challenged and errors are therefore found. In a room in which everyone agrees on fundamental assumptions, learning will not take place because key assumptions that may be wrong will not be challenged. Core conceit of this book: we have two constitutions. They're doing two different things in two very different domains, but structurally they are very similar. Not coincidentally, since they were devised at the same time period by many of the same people. And their values directly map onto each other. The US Constitution relies on political freedom, respect for law, and pluralism, constitution of knowledge, free inquiry, respect for facts, and viewpoint diversity. And those are the values that I think that we are seeking to defend. The Constitution of knowledge does not govern all our lives. It does not govern what we do in a church or synagogue, what we say at the Thanksgiving table, but it does govern 4 essential realms of civic life that make it possible to live in a free, peaceful, and well-informed society. What are those 4? The first is journalism, reality-based journalism. This is my world. I'm a journalist by training. This is a newsroom. This is a hub where countless ideas, tips are brought in every day. They're sorted through. They're valued. They're checked for truth. Some get pursued. Some get deferred. This is a hub for sorting truth from falsehood. Second essential realm, law. The idea of a fact, per se, does not originate in science. It predates modern science. It's from medieval law because courts, in order to have just outcomes, had to have an account of the facts, like who really claimed the donkey first. Courts and the legal system are fact finders. They use adversarial methods to do that. They use evidence and argument. You're not allowed to make stuff up, and so forth. If a court of law is not fact-based, it is capricious and tyrannical. Just as important, government. The United States government, like all Western liberal governments, is shot through with institutions that are that investigate fact, that do research, and that do administrative work that is fundamentally accountable to facts. There are dozens and dozens. I threw some of them up there. They're everything from intelligence, the inspectors general, Congressional Research Service, the Administrative Procedure Act, dating just after World War II, requires the government to undergo fact-finding in order to regulate so that it can't just make stuff up about your business and regulate it. A government that is not tethered to truth, as we know from Arendt and Orwell, is a tyrannical government. It can, for example, make up facts in order to prosecute a former FBI director at the behest of a leader. That's happening right now. Finally, again, the reason we're here, the long pole in the tent of the 4 major pillars of the reality-based community, this is the single most important. That's the world of science, research, and academia. These are our great universities, the one I went to on the upper left, NIH, and the other great research institutes. I work at a think tank on the upper right. But these are also the professional societies and the credentialing societies, the journals and associations, vast numbers of institutions putting their shoulder to the wheel every day to try to find truth. I like to emphasize that the Constitution of knowledge is the single greatest and most transformative social technology in human history. I think it's well ahead of whatever comes second, because under its rules, which are decentralized and depersonalized and rule-based, anyone anywhere in the world can participate in a global effort to spot each other's errors and therefore advance knowledge. And as a result of this, humanity has created a kind of global hive mind of millions of minds and countless institutions developing truth. Here, just for example, this is a map of collaborations on coronavirus-related articles. What you see here is research spanning the globe. Here is the share of science and engineering articles internationally co-authored. This is, unfortunately, I couldn't find updates on these figures. But in only 10 years here, you see in the United States that the number of collaborations across borders increased by over 50%. Look at China, it's even larger. What's happening right now is that millions of minds in places like India and Africa are entering the reality-based community, making this system ever richer. It is Although I cannot prove this, I believe it is the case that every morning, literally every morning, humanity adds more to its store of knowledge than it did in its entire first 200,000 years. And that's the result of the constitution of knowledge. Here's a practical example of that. This is published research on COVID-19. 0 papers, January 2020. 16 months later, April 2021, over 130,000. And another result of that, this is my husband being vaccinated in March of 2021. This is only a year after the virus was discovered. The virus was decoded by an international group of researchers across international borders over the course of a weekend. Vaccine was designed shortly after over a course of another weekend. There's never been a technology like this. And defending this technology, defending its integrity, is the most important thing that we, you and I, are here to do. Okay, so what are we defending from? What's the problem if this is such a miraculous institution? Well, take a look at this. This is polling data from Pew. This is the percentage of the public that agrees that colleges have a negative effect on the way things are going in the country. And what you see there is over a 10-year period, 2012 to 2022, that percentage rises by almost double. It rises by almost 20 percentage points. This represents a collapse in Americans' confidence in our colleges and universities. A lot of this is because of Republicans, but Democrats and independents went in the same direction. When you see a collapse like that, when you see almost half the country saying colleges have a negative effect, there's no way that you can preserve the autonomy and independence and prestige of our colleges and universities in the face of those kinds of cultural headwinds. So what went wrong? What happened? Well, a lot. But I think a good part of what happens is these 3 essentials for the constitution of knowledge. A lot of colleges and universities lost sight of these. They began drifting away from those core necessities and missions. So, perfect storm. I don't think any one thing could have accounted for the erosion that we've seen. But here are 6. You can add your own, but here are 6 that you've all talked about over the course of this weekend and previous speeches. Ideology. A very different view of what science is and what truth is. We're talking here about postmodernism and decolonization of science and all of that. But here's a good example. You may have heard of the deplatforming of Charles Murray and the violent incident at Middlebury College in March 2012. You probably didn't see this. This is how the deplatforming occurred. This is what the students were reading while Murray was trying to speak. In this world today, there is little that is true fact. It's power all the way down. Notice the scare quotes around fact. Could you all hear that, by the way? Was that loud enough? In that period, we saw a lot of manifestos to that effect. Claremont students said that free speech perpetuates systems of domination. Middlebury students said free speech puts undue burdens on specific groups of students. At Williams College, Coalition Against Racist Education said that free speech imperils marginalized students. We could have a long conversation about why all of that is false. I am a homosexual American man born in 1960 in a world where just being me was illegal in every state in the Union and marriage was unthinkable. I'm now married to a man, and that's only because of free speech. But that's my other talk. Let's add to ideology fragility. You've heard about this from Jonathan Haidt, among others, Greg Lukianoff. This is a psychological phenomenon. We used to say when I was a kid, sticks and stones will break your bones, but names will never hurt you. That changed to sticks and stones may break your bones, and so will words. This came up in the previous session. Speech as violence. Here's a famous incident. This is Professor Nicholas Christakis in a Yale College courtyard in 2015, surrounded by students. Listen to what the student says here. So this student is not entirely wrong. Universities are many things. They are, among other things, they're finishing schools, and they are residences, and you have to walk by some bad stuff sometimes in order to get to your house. But the general sense here is that universities are there to protect our home and make us feel safe. Here's a email. Whoops. There's an email that Yale's president at the time sent to a faculty member I know who gave me permission to use this, who said the consideration weighing on his mind in all of this was not a determination not to offend anyone, rather it was a desire not to push a group of extremely fragile students past their breaking points. Well, the students are the customers, and when they come to school with an attitude of fragility and not understanding how to conduct a civil argument, you can expect the sort of scene that we just saw. Homogeneity. We have the chairman and the president of Heterodox Academy here. You're about to hear a lot from us. I'm also on the board, as is Frank Laukin. And of course, we're, going to tell you about that. You've all seen these charts. I won't belabor the point. When I was in college in the late 70s and early 80s, you had pretty decent representation of conservatives in middle of the road, and they were, a pretty good mix. You see what happens there, and you see that by the decade of starting about 10 and 15 years ago, far left and liberal just completely dominate. Conservative, also middle of the road, drop off the cliff. This, by the way, is faculty ideology. This is from several compilations of data. And you've all seen this stuff too. This is a number of Democratic faculty members for every Republican in 25 fields. This is Langbert in 2018. Engineering, chemistry, economics, not too bad. It's 5 or 6 to 1. And that probably means that in the course of an academic career, most students on their way to becoming academic professionals will encounter someone who is not a doctrinaire left-winger. But if you look at the bottom there, religion, anthropology, communications, it is now entirely possible, and indeed arguably even routine in a number of fields, for a person to go through her entire career in academia, from undergraduate to dissertation to tenure, all the way to emerita, without ever encountering a middle-of-the-road or conservative point of view. That has got to skew the outcomes of the science that we do in ways that are detrimental. And it's also got to skew the experience that people are having along the way. And it's added to by politicization. Now, you've all talked about this as well. It came up last night over dinner. This is the phenomenon where people in higher education decide that their ultimate mission, the telos of the university, is to make the world a better place. And they do that by adopting certain political views. Here's a good statement of that. This is from a historian, a British historian. But I play this to emphasize this is going on in a lot of different fields.
So in the UK right now, if you want to get funding, if you want to get promotion, if you want to just get a job, then you need to toe a certain political line. And if you don't, you risk not getting a career at all, not getting funding, not getting promotion. And that's a recent development. It wasn't there 10 years ago. So I think that has distorted the process. I know that there are young historians who dissent from this political line, but they voice their dissent at risk of their careers.
We see this kind of change happening in the very heart of the scientific enterprise. Here, well known, for example, this is the journal Nature Human Behavior, August of 2022, changed its editorial standards to refuse or retract submissions or publications that they believed embody singular privileged perspectives. What they're saying here is that a piece of science can be true, it can be new, and it can be important, and they can still reject it because in their view, in the journal's view, it embodies singular privileged perspectives. By the way, a phrase that they are not able to define in any clear way. The reason for that, they say, is science for too long has been complicit in perpetuating structural inequalities and discrimination in society. Now, that's not science. Science is not about making political choices about truth. Science is about truth itself. Here's another offshoot of the same bundle of problems, discrimination. This is data from Eric Kaufman, Academic Freedom in Crisis. This is the percentage of academics and graduate students in 2 countries, well, 3 countries actually, who openly acknowledge discriminating against right-leaning papers, grants, and promotions. Now, this is a little bit startling because these are just the people who are willing to say, yeah, I discriminate. I think we can assume that others discriminate without acknowledging it. And take a look at this. That's the future, folks. That's the PhD students. In North America, 1/3 of them are openly discriminating against right-leaning submissions. No wonder then conservatives perceive hostile environment. This is the percentage answering yes, agreeing there's a hostile climate toward people with your political beliefs in your department. You know, it's pretty high among centrists. It's over 1/3. These are not radicals. And then, of course, when you look at fairly right and very right, you see that the discomfort levels become large majorities. And finally, something else we talked about last night, bureaucratization. This is what's become a pretty well-known data point. This is Ohio State University's full-time diversity staff, headcount, and compensation. You can see over a period of only 5 years, compensation triples, headcount more than doubles. Now, there are a lot of issues around this. Like, one of them is, what the heck are these people doing? And another is, this is an inefficient way to run a university. But it's also a problem that most of these people, at least many of them, have not done actual academic research or taught in a classroom for years, if ever. They're bureaucrats, and they have other priorities than the constitution of knowledge. It's not just the diversity staff. You also have the student life people, and you have the general counsel's office, which seems to run any number of universities, and you have all the people who are involved in Title IX and Title VI enforcement, on and on and on. You get layers of people who are not there to do the core work of the university, and yet who are in a position frequently to hold the people who are doing the core work to account. One story is a professor I know, tenured professor, distinguished guy, who was hauled in for a 4-hour inquisition by a mid-level HR bureaucrat to justify his classroom practices because a student complained. What did the student complain about? Well, there was, a list of 10 charges, all of them facially having nothing to do with the fundamentals of teaching, but one of them was that she complained that the professor was using the words black and Hispanics as nouns when they should only be used as adjectives. Now, the right answer when a department chair or dean or HR office receives a complaint against a professor, which is facially does not even make an actionable complaint against the professor, is go talk to the professor. There's nothing I can do for you. If you have a problem with the way the course is being taught, that's not what we're doing, and this, I find, is exacting a real cost among faculty. I ask faculty when I talk to them, how confident are you that the university administration will have your back in a controversy with a student? They all say they don't. I can't remember the last time someone expressed confidence. I was in a meeting with a major university provost and a professor. I was there to talk to the provost. I mentioned this data point. The provost said, well, at our university, that's not true. Our professors know we are 100% behind them for academic freedom. Whereupon the professor said, I don't really believe that. Result of all this, when you put it together, well before the Trump administration, you were seeing inevitably state governments beginning restricting academic freedom because they believe that our universities are no longer on the level doing the job that the public expected them to do. You saw dozens of bills introduced across the country that would impose agendas, compromise academic freedom. Most famous case is Florida's Stop Woke Act, which you see Governor DeSantis here announcing. That's Chris Rufo to his left. That's all been going on in the last 3 to 4 years. And then, of course, the culmination. Florida, 2023. This is what then candidate Donald Trump had to say.
We are going to choke off the money to schools that aid the Marxist assault on our American heritage and on Western civilization itself. The days of subsidizing communist indoctrination in our colleges will soon be over.
He wasn't kidding around. What can universities do? What can they do? There's that. One could go on about this. Here's a list of 8. I called it from, time is short. I had 10 plus on here originally. But these are just examples of the sorts of things that universities can get to work on right now, and that groups like this can work on and have worked on. Adopt the Chicago principles, commitment to free speech, include First Amendment orientation and civil discourse orientation in freshman orientation, protect faculty and students from investigations of constitutionally protected speech. Just say we're not investigating it unless it's a facially, evidentiarily supported allegation of professional misconduct. If you just heard something you didn't like, sorry, we don't have jurisdiction. No coerced statements. This goes to DEI statements, among others. Institutional neutrality, the Calvin principles. You've all discussed that. Settle agreements informally. This is one I emphasize. We've created a whole structure, bias incident reporting, for example, of bureaucratizing what should be conversations that students have with other students face-to-face and that students have with professors face-to-face. That's how we learn to negotiate disagreements in a complex society. Instead of calling their mommy in the form of the university administration, students should be told, well, go work it out. You'll figure it out. Discourage ideological discrimination. There are people who favor affirmative action for conservatives, smart people for conservatives in hiring. I wouldn't go that far. I don't see a way to do that, to implement that wouldn't be problematic. But universities should be surveying their faculty to find out, oh, thank you, Peter. This is my hot tea rescue. Yeah, this stuff is a miracle, by the way. Okay, tea. Oh, that's so good. Students could do what the University of North Carolina did a few years ago to great effect. They could survey their students and their faculty to find out, are people of faith comfortable here? Are conservatives, are moderates comfortable here? If not, why not? And then they can go around and actively seek to remove some of the obstacles that people are experiencing to viewpoint diversity. Prioritize viewpoint diversity, follows from that. This is our mission at Heterodox Academy. I'm going to add one that's not on here. I took it off and I shouldn't have because it may be the most important, and that's presidential leadership. The person at the top of the university sets the tone all the way down. And the leadership of the person on top of the university, as opposed to sometimes merely the acquiescence of the person at the top also makes all the difference. And the faculty, those faculty who are not on board with whatever is the social justice cause du jour, will not believe that they are protected to speak up, to express their true viewpoints. And students won't believe that if they're not hearing it in clear, unequivocal terms from the person at the top about what kind of university this is and what we believe in. So I go around saying, university presidents, university leadership, in some ways, is the single most important thing to emphasize. So how are we doing? You know, there is a group, Chris Rufo is one of these people, who say, okay, heterodox academy and so-called reformers, you had your shot, you got nowhere, you made no progress, it's time for the heavy artillery to come in, and that's me, and that's why we are fining Columbia University $200 million and suspending all of Harvard's research grants. I don't think that's true. It always takes a while for civil society to get organized in the face of a threat. And organization is the key. But we have seen in the last 5 years, and everything I'm about to show you and more predates January 20th, 2025, we have seen civil society on campuses and off organize increasingly, and I think effectively, to provide a counterweight and to begin pushing universities back toward their missions. Here is the Academic Freedom Alliance. This is led by Keith Whittington at Yale. This is a national NATO for college professors. An attack on the academic freedom of one is an attack on all, very valuable group. Heterodox Academy, from which you're about to hear much more. Institute for Liberal Values, not a campus group, but a startup, which includes a lot of professors, which is talking about how you instantiate liberalism in cultural institutions, including universities. We have the Alumni Free Speech Network. This is Princetonians, the first. I'm an old friend of Stuart Taylor, who started it. I'm a real believer in these organizations, as you're about to hear. Faculty organizations. This is the Harvard Council on Academic Freedom. I think there's one at MIT, right? I think we were talking about that last night. There's one at Stanford. I think there's one at Chicago. I think there are others, and I'm hoping there will be more elsewhere. Only when faculty organize to defend their prerogatives can this job really get ahead of steam. Of course, these are the big guys on the block. You all know all about them. And there's more. Something I'm very keen on. I was a skeptic originally, but I've been won over. There are now well over a dozen schools of civic thought, publicly funded, at public universities across the country. These are bringing viewpoint diversity and scholarly rigor on campus by establishing centers of civic thought. I have been associated with the one in my hometown, Arizona State, and they're doing a wonderful job over there. And they have managed, I thought against the odds, to integrate their center with faculty so that they are accepted as a part of the university, of the curriculum. I believe they now have a major, though don't quote me on that. That's a wonderful, positive model of bringing viewpoint diversity to campus. Here's another. This is the University of Austin in Texas. I was on their advisory board until last month. I rotated off after being on there from the founding. As you see, their motto is, "We fearlessly pursue truth." This is an effort to set up a brand new university that's devoted single-mindedly to the precepts of the Constitution of Knowledge. We don't know how it's going to work out, but I was on campus talking to students and faculty back in May and was deeply impressed by what they have managed to do in the course of only the 3 or 4 years since they've started. Here's another favorite. I bet you guys don't know about this. Raise your hand if you've heard of Braver Angels Campus. Whoa! Holy cow, that's half the room. You've heard of Braver Angels Campus Debates. So I was a founding board member back in the day of Braver Angels. I think our debates program is the single best thing we do. These Braver Angels debates are community debates. There's no preparation, there's no winner, they're loser. They're debates, they're truth-seeking debates where controversial issues can be discussed by community members. Here's the key. As with the Constitution of Knowledge, the key is always structure. You just don't put people in a room and plant them. You create a structure. This is a parliamentary debate. It's timed with a trained moderator These are happening at college campuses across the country in consort with ACTA, whose president was here this morning, and with Bridge USA, which is a national student group with chapters on something like 60 campuses. To bring these debates to college campuses, these are student-run and student-managed debates. They're faculty sponsors, but students pick the topics and they run the debates, and they love it. I can talk about John Stuart Mill until I am blue in the face, but it is only the experience of a structured, civil, heartfelt conversation that creates that synapse jump in the brain that says, my God, we can have this conversation and we can learn from each other. It's a wonderful thing. University of Denver is putting into effect what they call debate across the curriculum. Their goal is to make curricular debate as part of instruction available to every single professor on campus. It's a long road to get there, but they're already started down that road. So think about debate. And then there's this group. You've heard of them. I'm going to end with a brief and hopefully unnecessary pep talk. The civil society organization of regular people to defend the Constitution of Knowledge was the missing element for the first long period of the woke revolution, whatever, political correctness back in the 90s, whatever you called it. A lot of people on and off campus said, well, I'll sit this one out. It's just some lunatic stuff going on at Harvard. It won't really affect the country. It's a sea change when alumni get involved only because they care about the future of higher education. Alumni are in a position to counterbalance some of the influences of the minority, and it is a minority of activists on campus who are twisting and distorting the mission of higher education. You are in a position of trust in your associations. You can make a difference. You are making a difference. I believe that this group in this room is profoundly important at MIT, of course, but also beyond MIT. Your success will trigger the birth of more of these chapters, and it will trigger the answer to the key question, which I asked at the outset. Can academia, can universities be saved from themselves? I do not believe, some disagree, this is a conversation you're about to hear. Some believe only outside pressure can reform universities. I believe that outside political pressure will only politicize universities. I believe that the real safeguard, the only real safeguard for the Constitution of Knowledge is the reality-based community. And I believe, despite what Chris Rufo and others say, there are still vast reservoirs of integrity and dedication in the faculties of American universities. The key is mobilizing those dedicated people, helping them find their voice, and then from the inside out, returning these educational institutions to their mission. And I think it can be done, and I think you guys are helping to do it. So thank you. Did I mention available at fine bookstores everywhere? So we have a few minutes to talk, yeah?
In your chart about...
Could folks just say who they are if I don't already know you?
Richard Ross, I don't think we've met, but I
Hey.
enjoyed your remarks.
Nice to meet you.
Your wonderful chart about 1.6 to 1 for engineering and 180 to 0 for... where are libertarians in that? It was liberal versus conservative, but my friends in engineering, certainly on the West Coast, consider themselves libertarian.
I think they're normally counted as right of center.
Really?
By polls. Yeah, there aren't enough of them to make a separate group. So they're just they're considered part of the conservative coalition.
Oh.
That's also how national pollsters do it too, you know. Left, right, center.
I'll bring it to Kathleen Skama. Have you ever debated Chris Rufo? And if you haven't, I think that would be a great program for the MIT.
I have not. Issue the invitation. Host the debate.
I will say, we do have a debate coming up in the session after this where we asked somebody from the Manhattan Institute to defend their statement, and they declined.
That's too bad. Do you all know what the Manhattan Institute statement is?
Well, there's copies of it out in the lobby if you want to brush up before the next session.
So it's a bill of indictment against universities, which you can agree or disagree with. I think there's truth in it, but it's also exaggerated. But it also has a paragraph saying that the President of the United States should essentially be empowered to fix American universities. That's for me a clear step too far.
Yes, Steve Carhart, External Relations Chair of MFSA. I am very skeptical that we will be able to reduce the administrative bloat in universities. In particular, we are witnessing DEI personnel having been after dismantlement of here the centralized program, fading into the bloat of the administrative bureaucracy, and short of the coming reduction in overhead rates on research, which has been, in my opinion, a slush fund for a lot of other things that are not helpful to the mission of MIT. Short of this, I doubt this could happen, and I would appreciate your thoughts on that issue. Thanks.
So on what to do about those bloated numbers, you all are better informed than I am. I worry about the epistemic consequences of loading up universities with people who are not really part of the constitution of knowledge. But how to deal with the cost side, the administrative burden, the bloat, all of you know more about that than I do. A lot of people say it's just that's going to require just cutting some federal and other overheads and so forth. Have you all tried to address that problem at MIT? If you think it is a problem. Just too many head count? Is that something this group is focused on?
I think it's something we're very interested in, but mission-wise, it's a bit tangential. I think some of the bigger cultural issues of free speech, I see Wayne reaching for the microphone across the table, so I'll hand it to him. But I would say it's a bit tangential or orthogonal.
Yeah, contrary to some more comprehensively oriented alumni group, we're focused only on free speech. Our position is, if the bloat can be discussed in a constitution of knowledge way with facts and things, then the problem will be taken care of. But it has to be able to be discussed.
Yeah, I would think, again, administration and efficiency are not my bailiwick, except to the extent that they damage the epistemic mission. But I would think this would be a natural place for trustees to begin to get involved. That's another whole can of worms. But I would direct your question ideally to Michael Polyakov next time you see him.
I'm going to go here and then to here.
First, just want to say, Jonathan, that was a fantastic talk. It was brilliant and wonderful. And
well, thank you. Since you're my boss on the board of Heterodox Academy,
and I wish,
my wish
would be that you could deliver it at every major university in the United States. Just on the issue of administrative bloat, it's not a central core of this organization, but just to give you one data point. So yesterday, a major figure from the Faculty of Arts and Sciences at Harvard issued a statement that went out to the entire community. It's the results of a working group that's been working for 4 or 5 months on administrative structure of the FAS. It says we have come to the conclusion that there has been a markedly excessive growth of administration in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. It's due to missions that were given that shouldn't be given in some cases. It's due to the fact that the way things accreted to the administrative structure were inefficient and thoughtlessly constructed, and over the next months, the work of a group is going to be finding ways to reduce that. This is something that many people have been asking for, have been claiming as a problem. It was ignored. It was not being taken seriously. And I can tell you now that it is. At Harvard Medical School that I used to lead, the dean put out a statement last week saying that there will be about a 15 to 20% reduction in many aspects of administration, hopefully without loss of any necessary functions. In fact, maybe some will be gained.
So that's encouraging. This came up last night at a dinner. Again, this isn't my central concern, but it is a concern. It's not just a question of efficiency. When you've got a campus that's all loaded up with bureaucrats, I think there's an educational cost to that as well. When I went to Yale in 1978 to 1982, it was a very flat structure. There was almost no one. There were very few people between the students, for example, or the faculty and the president. There was department chair, and there was dean, and then provost, and that was basically it. One of the reasons you didn't have a lot of stuff like students complaining to the administration when they were offended and setting an investigation process was because there was no one to complain to. There was just nowhere to bring that except to the other student. I was on a major R1 university campus a couple years ago, and I asked a group of professors who were sympathetic to us. They're a group like us on campus. And I said, well, what do you think of having all these, these deans that students go to with whatever little complaint they have about, student life? And they said, well, we wouldn't know what to do without it. We become dependent on it. We don't know how to handle those controversies. It's not in our job description. So when a student says, I'm unhappy, I heard something racist, we just say, well, go talk to that dean of whatever about that. So you've got this dependency now on this bureaucracy. And I think that impacts the way education happens.
Do we have any hands on that side of the room? Let's we'll take it there.
Hello. Thank you
Hi.
for that. Hi. My name is Charlene. I'm at one of the hospitals now here in Boston, but I was previously a postdoc at the Harvard School of Public Health. And I followed everything that you said and with much agreement until the point where you said that you thought that some of this illiberality was driven by just a minority of activists. That might be true across universities as a whole, but I don't think it's true in schools of public health.
That could well be right. And there is, as you saw from the charts, there is nothing like uniformity across disciplines and departments. And we know where the big trouble spots are. In fact, I won't name them, but some names came up last night over dinner. I think at MIT you know where the trouble spots are. So what you say doesn't surprise me.
Jonathan, my name's Pete Denton, class of whatever it was, 67. But I'm also involved in the Board of Trustees and fundraising chair for MFSA. So I want to talk to all of you later. But in any case, could you put your slide back up that had your proposed solutions?
I will try.
And
I'm not
you
a
said you
genius at
didn't
this.
put one and then you talked to it
And that
briefly
was
about.
university presidents, yeah.
Okay, which I totally agree with, and I'm glad, I think you should leave that on the slide. So, I listened to you go through this list, and settled disagreements informally, maybe a little Pollyannish, but certainly should be tried. But the last two bullets, discourage ideological discrimination. How about firing people, which with tenure and everything, but prioritize viewpoint diversity. I really don't know what those means and whether there's any realism to them, if you could respond.
Well, there are people here like Jeff and John Tomasi who do this for a living and are a much better place to answer it. But I think we've seen a winnowing process in university hiring in which, knowingly or not, people hire people like themselves with similar views. And the way you fight that is by making a concerted effort to do audits and ask questions We know departments look obsessively at race, class, and gender. Are they looking at people of faith? Are they looking at political disagreement? Are they making sure those people feel comfortable? So to me, prioritize that means first and foremost, you find out what you're doing. You find out who you're hiring and how and where the obstacles are to intellectual diversity, and then you address those.
You get anybody to change. You've identified the problem.
Well, that's your job. Why are you here? I mean, you're the guys, the women and men who are in this room because you hope to change this university, right? So how are you going to do that? Don't ask me. I'm here to support you. Now, we can talk about how Heterodox Academy is going to do that and why you should give Heterodox Academy your donations. But I'll let John Tomasi do that instead. But that's the question. It won't change if you don't try to change it, right? What am I missing?
Well, you said a little while ago that the universities had to change from within. You just said they have to change from without.
Well, you are within. You're part of the university community. No, I'm getting a scowl.
Not really.
I'm getting a scowl. No, you're not part of the university community? Not anymore? You have an alumni association. You have... So you're just another outside lobbying group?
Essentially.
Huh. John Tomasi will fortunately rescue me in this sticky situation.
I've got a few hands up. I'll do my best to get to them all. Harold here has had his hand up a little bit ago, so I'm going to start with him, and then we'll see how much farther around the room I get.
Thanks for the talk. When people graduate college, some prioritize intellectual pursuits and go into academia, and others have other priorities, financial, others, and choose a different path. The liberal bias in academia is probably because of that difference in prioritization. And if the choices are financial priority versus intellectual pursuit, the only way you're going to correct the problem is if somehow you make the salaries in academia match the salaries in industry, which just doesn't seem to me to be realistic. So I don't have a solution, but it seems to me that has to be part of the thought process is how we're going to solve that problem.
Thanks. I'll take that as a comment.
I'm gonna go over here for a bit.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Rauch. I think a lot of it depends on how bad the problem is. Specifically, like following up on what Charlene said, public health schools are fairly shifted, but also is it just a couple of pockets that are corrupted in terms of their mission? My view is that it's much more widespread, and eventually when you have enough pockets of corruption, you don't have pants anymore, you have just a bunch of pockets. And let me give you a statistic to prove that. So this is a national survey that was done. It said only 28% of academics answered this question in this way, that they would have lunch with someone who said that trans women should not be allowed in women's shelters. That's a national survey in 2021. So that's not a pocket. That's not just a school in the public health school. That's a really interesting data point to show you how radical the median person in these schools is. So I think the reasonable people are the few. This was U.S. academics.
So I'll go out on a limb and guess that survey result would be different in 2025. It still wouldn't be good. We wouldn't like it. But as I think we've seen, we discussed this last night and I think some this morning, we have seen significant change since peak woke, which was 2020 and 2021. FIRE just came out with their annual student survey. They have a huge data set, so they're able to ask granular questions like which specific topics are students most uncomfortable having candid conversations about. You will not be surprised to hear that Israel-Palestine is at the top of the list, and it's like half of students are uncomfortable talking about it. A huge number. Abortion and trans are right up there, and one other, which eludes me at the moment. A lot of topics aren't like that. A lot of topics are much lower on the list. But that's where the attention needs to go, on those topics and improving that climate of opinion.
Okay, I'm gonna take it down here, and then we'll see how far back I'm able to get before we hit time.
Yeah, I'm trying to be haiku-like, and your voices are more interesting than mine.
I'm so glad you brought up Braver Angels college debates as a model. I have, in my role as a journalist, I've written about what they do, and my takeaway is that they open discussion across the aisle by two things. Not just tolerance, but tolerance plus respect. So they establish common ground at the outset. And one of the ways to do that is active listening and then repeating as far as you remember and understand what your opponent, the person you're debating, has said. So they start from a position of feeling heard and hearing that's right. I'm a little bit concerned about your approach here today, and it's for one reason. How with, you brought up Trump, and it wasn't portrayed in a great light. How do you expect to bring Republicans and conservatives to the table with an approach like that? It seems
An approach
to
like
me-
Braver Angels debates?
Well, no, Braver Angels debates would do it.
Well, that's-
But your presentation here, I'm just saying that something about that made me think, oh, Republicans and conservatives in the audience here, among alums, are going to feel, ooh, we're demonized, whatever.
My problem
think
with
that's an
President Trump's statement is that this is a whole other conversation, but I support two constitutions, the United States Constitution and the Constitution of Knowledge, and I'm not willing to violate one in pursuit of the other. In terms of the goals of bringing pressure on universities, legal pressure, constitutional pressure for change, okay. And there are lots of ways that the government can do that are within those boundaries. The first thing you said is a partial answer to the previous comment, which is people not having lunch with each other. Remember, faculty and students these days are in these isolation booths where they are not socialized to speak to people who disagree with them, and very often they never even encounter those people. And this can be countered with programs like Braver Angels debates, in which people are placed, by choice, placed in situations where they encounter other people's views in a structured way. And the most common reaction people have on leaving Braver Angels workshops and debates is guess what they say? They say, we're not as divided as we've been led to believe, which, by the way, is true. So we can work on socializing our communities to get better at disagreeing. I think that is something we can get better at. Won't be perfect ever, but better.
I've got time for, I think, two more. I'll bring it over to...
Thank you. I have a really trivial question. If you believe that president is not to change university, that universities need to change themselves, why haven't they done so?
University presidents?
No, universities themselves. You said that the US president should not be trying to change universities. You believe that...
He can try to change them, but within the bounds of the law.
But why do you think, if you believe that universities can and able to change themselves, why haven't they so far?
Well, I think they've started to. And what I'm trying to show here is that we have seen significant organizations of constituencies. We are seeing, I was just told last night that Sally Kornblue is better on these issues than her predecessor, and that she's working with some of you to instantiate some of these policies. We were told by a student last night, a conservative student who is now a rising junior, that in the time he's been here, he has seen, others were in the room, you'll tell me if I got this right, but that he has seen very significant progress in the campus climate, in his ability to have the kinds of conversations he would like to have. So I think universities have made progress. They can continue to make progress. It will be slow, but it all depends on the effective mobilization of people like you.
And you don't think the only reason that conversation beginning to get better or is even able to take place is because what President said in your own snippet?
On the contrary, I fear that what the president is doing may be a setback, because I'm afraid that it may trademark internal reform efforts as right-wing and dangerous. All of the developments that we discussed, including one of the 2 years of progress that the conservative student mentioned, happened before President Trump.
Okay, I have time for one more, and I just want to check my bias against this side of the room that I'm on. Do I have any hands raised over in this left hemisphere? Okay, then I'm gonna stick to my biases. I'm gonna bring it down to. You two want to flip for it?
Well, ladies first, but then you take two.
Thank you for your talk. And I'm thinking about the part you spoke about reality, facts. I really believe in the importance of institutions and people trusting institutions. And I was very disheartened during COVID at, for the best of intentions, leaders of those institutions knowingly lying to the public, whether it was Dr. Fauci about masks as a noble lie, or the writers of the Proximal Origins paper who said it was a zootonic origin, but in their private Slack channels, and this was written about in the New York Times, were saying it was, quote, so friggin' likely that it was a lab leak.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm wondering about is, it's very hard to trust that the people in these institutions are actually telling you the facts and living in reality if they're lying to people, again, for good intentions, to elicit a certain kind of behavior. And I'm wondering if you see, I haven't seen a reckoning in those institutions that actually lying for good reason is counterproductive and will lead to a distrust that will take us down a negative path.
So that is such a big subject and somewhat extrinsic to these questions of universities that we should leave it probably for another day. Fixing those big institutions out there like the CDC and HHS and whatnot, that's a story in and of itself.
But do you have thoughts about what kind of reckoning should happen in institutions around these topics so that people can trust they're getting facts from people who should be giving them to them?
As I say, it's a conversation for another day, and we don't entirely agree on the premise of the question in terms of lying per se. That was a situation in which a great deal was unknown and too much was said with too much certainty too quickly. I think we have learned something from that, and I've heard, for example, Francis Collins talk about what we've learned from that, and we better have learned from it because it won't be the last pandemic. But I personally do not see most of that as deliberate lying and malevolence. I see it more as institutional failure, which calls for improvement. Again, not a satisfying answer because that's a different book, right?
Okay, so one more, and I guess possession is 90% of ownership, so thank you. But first of all, thank you, because I think 90% of your talk was fascinating, and I agreed with most of it. But what I did want to take a bit of was first with the previous three, and now including the fourth question, which is really on the effectiveness and speed of change. Because you gave that list. Maybe things may have happened 1 or 2, 3 years ago. What I remember is what you were saying and pointing out, that just 2, 3 years ago, if you said anything against COVID, vax, or any of the other a few topics I could name, you were immediately canceled and shut off and all that, right? And so the question is, what's the effectiveness and the effective way to change that? And with all due respect, and pardon my ignorance, but I had never heard of a heterodox society. On the other hand, what Trump has managed to do in 6 months as a president is a palpable change. You name anybody on the street who has now heard about the pressure on universities and anti-Semitism and what that led to the change in both attitude, admissions process, as you mentioned, right? We're looking at the first potential generation where the students are actually admitted on merit as opposed to physical characteristics and so on, right?
Yes, that preceded Trump, by the way.
Well, I don't know. I
It was
mean,
a
I think,
Supreme
as you
Court
mentioned,
decision.
maybe so, but maybe the trend and the pressures and the discussions were there, but...
Well, and the Supreme Court was there.
Well,
I take your broad point. There is no question that a consequence, an important consequence, in my view, a largely good consequence of the 2024 election was to send a signal that the public has had it up to here with woke BS. There has been a change in the way people can talk about the trans issue. I got an email right after the election from a friend who is very anti-MAGA, libertarian guy, but who said, I'll tell you, if there's one good thing about this result, it's that I will never again introduce my pronouns.
That's not a bad thing.
And I think that's the way American politics works and should work. My beef with the Trump administration is the particular methods it's using. But I'm very happy that the American public told these folks enough is enough.
But you're taking the consultant approach, just like those 2 points before that you mentioned, right? Easy thing to suggest. How will it happen? What other levers are there? And what might have been illegal in what Trump did as opposed to using federal funds, to which the wallet, universities and most any institution will respond very quickly, right? So, and we've seen the effect. I mean, in 6 months, all of a sudden, there's been a marked change in attitude, in perception, in willingness to even consider the issues of free speech and all of that, right? So what would you suggest as a better and more effective way to do it?
I will, exactly. That is the exact subject of the debate which you're about to hear, which will include people who are substantially more qualified than I am. So I will turn it over to them. I will thank you for your time and your indulgence. And I will just say one more time, even if you guys feel like outsiders, you may not be officially part of the MIT community. You're not written into the charter, and I guess you're not on the corporation. But you are part of the civil society community of this school. You care about it, and you are loyal to it, or else you wouldn't be here. And that gives you passion, and it gives you influence. And the fact that you are using that influence in an effort to guide President Kornblue and her administration and this campus in a positive direction, that's the kind of thing that gives me hope. So I thank you for that.
Thank you. But